My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and I almost did not check it. I was elbow deep in my work, surrounded by fabric swatches, a half-eaten granola bar, and 3 cups of cold coffee. I had been pulling 18-hour days for 6 weeks straight, and my body was running on nothing but adrenaline and stubbornness. But something made me reach over and flip the screen up. The text was from my mother. "Vivian, do not bother coming tonight. This is a refined event. Only elites are invited. You would not fit in." I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the table, walked to my bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection for a long moment. 29 years old. Self-funded. Building something real. And my own mother had just texted me the word elites, like I was a stranger applying to get past a velvet rope. I want you to sit with that for a second. Not a forwarded message. Not a misunderstanding. My mother typed those words, reread them, and pressed send. And the craziest part? She had no idea what I was about to do that night. Let me take you back to where this whole thing started, because the cruelty in that text did not come from nowhere. It had been building my entire life. You just need to understand who I am and who my family is to truly feel the weight of what happened next. My name is Vivian Calloway, and I grew up in a house where worth was measured by appearances. My father, Reginald Calloway, was a retired investment banker who spent most of his retirement polishing his reputation at country clubs and charity galas. My mother, Nadine, curated her social circle the way other people curate art. Every dinner guest, every friend, every occasion had to pass some invisible test. Were they successful enough? Well-connected enough? Did they wear the right brands, drive the right car, live in the right zip code? I failed that test in their eyes, for most of my adult life. My older sister, Portia, passed it beautifully. Portia married Theron Winslow III when she was 26. He came from old money, wore custom suits on the weekends, and had a laugh that filled rooms at exactly the right volume. My parents adored him. They adored Portia too, but mostly because of who she had become by marrying him. She threw dinner parties. She had a house in Connecticut with a wine cellar. She was what my mother called established. I was not established. I was a mess, at least by their standards. What I actually was, for the record, was a woman who had walked away from a stable corporate job at 25 to build a clothing label from scratch. I called it Arlo & Company. I designed women's wear that was bold and structural, pieces that were meant to be worn by women who were done apologizing for taking up space. I had started with a single sewing machine in a studio apartment, sold pieces on my own website, and slowly, painfully, built a clientele. It had taken 4 years of watching my parents flinch every time someone asked what I did for work. 4 years of my mother changing the subject at family dinners when my name came up. 4 years of my father calling my career a hobby, with a smile that was meant to look kind but never quite made it there. The thing is, I had stopped needing their approval somewhere around year 2. That does not mean it stopped hurting. Those are 2 different things, and I think a lot of people mix them up. You can be fine without someone's love and still feel the absence of it like a stone in your chest. The party that prompted my mother's text was their 35th wedding anniversary celebration. It was being held at the Ashford Club, a private event space in the city that my father had been a member of for decades. Think polished mahogany, white-gloved waitstaff, and a guest list that read like a who's who of old money and new wealth. My mother had been planning it for months. She had hired an event coordinator named Sloan, had custom invitations printed on thick cardstock, and had chosen a 7-course menu with wine pairings that cost more per person than most people spend on groceries in a month. I had been invited. Or at least, I had assumed I was invited, because I was their daughter. That assumption turned out to be wrong. The original conversation about the party happened 2 weeks earlier, at Sunday brunch at my parents' house. Portia and Theron were there. Their twins, Beatrice and Ro, were running around the garden in matching outfits that cost what I paid for electricity. My mother had been talking about seating arrangements, about which guests would sit near my father's former colleagues, and at some point she had looked at me and said, very casually, "We are keeping the guest list tight, Vivian. Just people who are really in the same sphere." I had let it go. I told myself she was just being frantic about planning and did not mean anything pointed by it. I was wrong about that too. 2 weeks later, the night of the party, she sent that text. I sat with my phone face down for about 4 minutes. Then I turned it back over and reread the message one more time. Do not bother coming. Only elites are invited. You would not fit in. Here is what I did not do. I did not cry. I did not call Portia. I did not call my father. I did not drive to the Ashford Club and make a scene. I did not even respond to the text. What I did was go back to my desk, open my laptop, and finish preparing the press release I had been working on for 6 weeks. Let me tell you what that press release contained, because this is where the story shifts. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is getting good. Drop where you're watching from in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. 3 months before that party, I had been quietly approached by a woman named Gwendolyn Ferris, the head of wholesale partnerships at a major upscale retailer. One of those department stores that people wait in line outside of during sale events. Gwendolyn had found Arlo and Company through a stylist she worked with, had ordered 3 pieces for herself, and had loved them enough to schedule a formal meeting. That meeting had turned into 6 more meetings. Those meetings had turned into a contract. And that contract, which I had signed 2 weeks prior and which was under embargo until the launch date, was worth $400,000 in the first year alone, with a 5-year extension option. Arlo and Company was going into 22 stores nationwide. Tonight was the embargo lift. Tonight was when I was allowed to announce it publicly. I had spent 6 weeks preparing for this moment: the press release, the brand video, the updated website, the social campaign. I had hired a publicist named Theodora Banks 3 months ago, specifically for this launch. Theodora was sharp, well-connected, and extremely good at timing. She had pitched the story to 3 fashion and business publications in advance, and all 3 had agreed to run features the night of the announcement. My mother sent that text at 6:47 p.m. At 7 p.m., my publicist sent the press release. I want you to understand what I felt in that gap between 6:47 and 7 o'clock. It was not excitement, not yet. It was something quieter and stranger than that. It was the feeling of watching 2 realities about to collide and knowing exactly which one was going to survive. I pressed send on the campaign email, leaned back in my chair, and opened a bottle of sparkling water I had been saving for this moment. Not champagne. I was not celebrating. I was working. There is a difference. Meanwhile, at the Ashford Club, my parents' party was in full swing. I know what happened there because of what Portia told me later, in a phone call she made from a bathroom stall at approximately 9:15 p.m., whispering like a woman who had just witnessed something she could not fully process. But let me paint the picture for you first. The Ashford Club's main hall had been transformed. My mother had gone with white and gold as the color palette, with tall floral centerpieces on every table and a string quartet playing near the entrance. The guest list was approximately 80 people, my father's former banking colleagues, their wives, a few city council members my father knew from his charity board work, some of Portia and Theron's couple friends, and several of my mother's social circle. What was not present, me. What also was not present, at least in my mother's mind, was any consequence for sending that text. She had assumed, I think, that I would simply stay home and feel bad about it. That I would sit in my studio apartment eating takeout and scrolling through something sad, while she moved through the party accepting compliments on the centerpieces and pretending she only had one daughter. That is not what happened. The first crack appeared at around 7:45 p.m. Theodora had done her job extraordinarily well. The first feature went live at exactly 7 p.m. on a fashion and commerce site that had about 4 million monthly readers. The headline read, "Independent label Arlo and Company lands major retail deal in major industry coup." It included photos of the collection, quotes from Gwendolyn Ferris about why the retailer had chosen the brand, and a profile of me that framed the story as one about a self-funded designer who had built something remarkable without outside investment or family backing. That last phrase, "without family backing," was something I had said in my interview without really thinking about it. In retrospect, it landed exactly right. By 7:45, the article had been shared widely in fashion and business circles. By 8 o'clock, it had been picked up by 2 other publications. By 8:15, it had hit social media in a way that started generating real momentum. Here is where the party becomes interesting. One of the guests at the Ashford Club that night was a woman named Constance Aldridge. Constance was the wife of my father's former colleague, Douglas Aldridge, and she was one of those women who was permanently attached to her phone in a way that her generation was not supposed to be. She followed fashion. She read the kind of websites that had just published my story. And at approximately 7:52 p.m., she looked up from her phone mid-cocktail hour and said, to no one in particular, "Is this Reginald's daughter? The designer?" The table nearby heard her. Someone leaned over to look at her screen. And the question began spreading the way questions do at a party where everyone already knows everyone and gossip moves like current through water. My father was the first person to hear the question asked directly. His former colleague, a man named Barrett O'Say, pulled him aside near the bar and said, quietly but with genuine interest, "Reg, I just saw something about your daughter. This clothing line of hers. Is that right? She is going into 22 stores? I did not know she was doing something like that. Why did you not say anything?" My father, according to Portia, went very still. Barrett kept talking, filling in the silence with more questions, showing my father the article on his phone. My father looked at the screen. He looked at Barrett. And then he said something like, "Yes, Vivian has been working on her business," in the tone of a man who is trying very hard to sound like he already knew what he is reading. He did not know. My mother did not know. I had never told them the full scope of what I was building, partly because they never asked, and partly because some part of me had been waiting for exactly a moment like this one. Portia called me at 9:15 from the bathroom. "Vivian." Her voice was hushed and had an edge I could not quite name. Not angry. Not quite sorry either. Something in between. "You need to tell me what is happening." "I am working," I said. "How is the party?" "Do not do that. Mom's story is falling apart in real time." Barrett O'Say just gave a little speech at Dad's table about emerging designers and how important it is to recognize them in the family. He looked directly at Mom when he said it. She looked like she swallowed something sideways. I let that sit for a moment. "Vivian, did you time this deliberately?" "The embargo lifted tonight," I said. "I did not choose the date." That was not entirely true. Theodora and I had discussed timing. I had not moved the date to align with the party, but I had not moved it away from the party either, even though I had known they coincided. Let me be honest with you about that. Because I think real revenge is never clean. It always involves a choice, and I made mine. "People are asking where you are," Portia said. "Constance Aldridge told Mom she was disappointed you were not here. She wanted to congratulate you." "That is very kind of her." "Vivian." "Portia, what do you want me to say?" There was a long pause. Then she said very quietly, "I think you should come." And this is the part of the story I have thought about the most in the months since. Because I had not planned to go. My original plan, if I am being honest, was to stay home. To let the night unfold from a distance. To let the success speak for itself without having to be physically present for the humiliation. That felt cleaner, more dignified. But something Portia said lodged itself in me. Not the part about people asking where I was. The part about how my mother looked when Barrett O'Say made his little speech. I wanted to see that look with my own eyes. I changed out of my work clothes and into a dress from my own collection, a deep navy wrap dress, structured at the shoulders, clean and precise in a way that I knew my mother would recognize immediately as deliberate. I left my hair down. I did not rush. I arrived at the Ashford Club at 9:48 p.m. Just as the dessert course was beginning. The maitre d' looked at my name on my ID and said, "Of course, Ms. Calloway. Right this way." He had no idea I was not supposed to be there. Or maybe he did, and he did not care. Either way, he walked me into the main hall. The room noticed me before my parents did. That is the truest thing I can tell you about what happened next. I did not make an announcement. I did not walk in loudly. I came through the door and simply stood for a moment, and conversations began to shift, heads began to turn, because Constance Aldridge spotted me from across the room and let out a sound that was almost a shriek of delight. "There she is." Constance came toward me with her arms open. "I just read the whole article. I told Douglas," I said, "this woman is extraordinary. Your collection is gorgeous, I mean genuinely. I have been showing everyone." And she had been. I could tell from the way the room was responding, from the way people were looking at me with recognition rather than curiosity. They knew who I was before I introduced myself. They had read the article on their phones at the dinner table, in the bathroom, at the bar. The story had arrived at this party before I did. I spoke to Barrett O'Say, who shook my hand and told me he respected what I had built without shortcuts. I spoke to a city council member whose wife recognized one of my designs from a boutique she frequented. I spoke to several of my parents' friends who asked real questions about the business, about where the clothes would be available, about how long I had been working on this. My mother found me about 12 minutes after I arrived. She came across the room in the way people move when they are trying to appear unhurried while actually moving very fast. She was wearing a champagne gown that I knew had cost her more than it should have. Her expression was a complicated thing, not quite a smile, not quite the face she made when she was about to reprimand me. Something I had never seen on her before. "Vivian," she said, "you came." "I live in the city," I said. "The ride was short." She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at the people around me, at Constance Aldridge still hovering nearby, at Barrett O'Say talking to my father a few feet away. And I watched something shift behind her eyes. "I did not know," she said very quietly, "that you were this far along." "You did not ask," I said. Just as quietly. Not cruelly. Just as a fact. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked at me again with that expression I could not name, and then said, "You look beautiful tonight." It was the most inadequate thing she could have said, and I think she knew it. But it was also the most honest thing she had said to me in years, so I let it land. "Thank you," I said. "Happy anniversary, Mom." I stayed for 45 minutes. I talked to people who wanted to talk to me. I let my father put his arm around me when Barrett O'Say pulled out his phone to take a photo, which I allowed because I am not in the business of humiliating my father in public. I smiled for the camera. But I did not pretend the text had not happened. I did not let my mother hug me warmly and laugh it off as a misunderstanding. When she tried to pull me into a conversation about how exciting this all was, I was cordial and brief and gently unavailable. I left at 10:35. I said goodbye to Portia at the door. "She feels terrible," Portia said. "She should think about that," I said. "Will you talk to her?" "Eventually," I said. "Not tonight." I drove home with the windows down. The city was loud and bright and moving in that particular way it moves late on a Friday, full of people who are out trying to feel something. I did not feel triumphant, exactly. It was more like equilibrium. Like something had finally been placed where it always should have been. 3 days later, my mother called me. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was nearly 4 minutes long, which is longer than she has ever spoken to me in a single uninterrupted stretch, and in it she said several things that I will not share here because some things are still private even when you are telling your story. What I will tell you is that she used the word proud 3 times. She had never used it to me directly before. Not once in 29 years. I called her back the following day. We talked for an hour. She said she had not understood the scale of what I was doing. I told her gently that she had not asked. There was a long silence on the phone after I said that, the kind of silence that has weight to it, that means something is being absorbed. Then she said quietly, "You are right. I should have asked." It was not easy. It was not the full resolution that movies would have you believe happens in moments like this, where people transform overnight and love each other the right way from then on. My mother is who she is. My father is who he is. Families like mine change slowly or not at all, and I am clear-eyed about that. But something shifted. Something real. Before I close this out, let me go back and fill in something I glossed over, because it matters for you to feel the full weight of that night. The years before it were not just years of hustle and struggle. They were years of very specific, very deliberate cruelty dressed up in the language of parental concern. When I left my corporate job at 25, my father called me the following Sunday. Not to ask how I was feeling. Not to understand what my plan was. He called to tell me I was making an emotional decision and that I needed to think seriously about what this looks like to people. When I asked him what people he meant, he went quiet for a moment and then said, "People who matter, Vivian." I remember staring at the wall of my studio apartment while he said that. I was standing next to my sewing machine, which I had just purchased with the last $1,700 in my bank account. And I remember thinking, I'm going to build something so undeniable that you will not know how to talk about it. That is not a healthy thought, I want to be clear about that. Revenge is not a business plan. You cannot sustain a company on spite. But anger, channeled correctly, can be the thing that gets you out of bed at 5 in the morning when every reasonable instinct in your body is telling you to quit. And for me, in those early months, it was. There was also the Christmas dinner when my mother introduced me to her friend's daughter, a woman named Bridget Forsyth who had just been promoted to partner at a law firm, and my mother said, in front of a table of 8 people, "Bridget, this is my daughter Vivian. She sews. Not she is building a clothing label. Not she is an entrepreneur. She sews." Like I was a hobby she had to explain around. Bridget looked slightly mortified on my behalf. But my mother moved on so smoothly that I was left sitting there holding my wine glass, deciding in real time whether to say something or let it pass. I let it pass. I always let it pass because I was raised to keep the peace, and because I believed, somewhere in the back of my mind, that one day my work would speak loudly enough that no clarification would ever be needed again. And there was the birthday dinner for my father, when I was 27, where he went around the table and said something proud about each of his children. When he got to Portia, he talked for nearly 3 minutes. When he got to me, he said, "And Vivian is still figuring things out, but we are rooting for her," and moved on. At 27. After 2 years of 70-hour weeks and a growing customer base. Still figuring things out. I smiled. I raised my glass. I went home that night and worked until 3 in the morning because I could not sleep. All of that history is why the text landed the way it did. And all of that history is why what happened at the Ashford Club mattered as much as it did. It was not just about one party. It was about every time I had let it pass. Every time I had swallowed it. Every time I had smiled at a table and quietly filed away one more reason to work harder. There is a version of this story where I confronted my parents publicly that night. Where I stood in the middle of that room and said, in front of everyone, "You texted me that I was not elite enough to be here." Some part of me, I will admit, fantasized about that version. There is something in all of us that wants the dramatic moment, the public reckoning, the scene everyone talks about on the drive home. But real power does not announce itself. My mother was already being asked by Constance Aldridge why she had never mentioned my deal. My father was already being congratulated by his peers for having a daughter who had built something remarkable from the ground up. The reckoning was happening all around me, organically, without me saying a single accusatory word. And that, in the end, is the real revenge. Not the confrontation. The contrast. They had sent me away to protect an image. And the image, as it turned out, needed me far more than I needed it. The Arlo and Company launch went the way Theodora had promised it would. The press coverage generated more press coverage. The retailer placement drove traffic back to my website. By the end of the first month, I had sold out of 2 collections and was fielding requests from 2 boutiques in Europe asking about international wholesale partnerships. I am telling you all of this not to brag. I am telling you because I want you to understand the full shape of what happened that night. My parents built their identities on the idea that success looks a certain way, that it lives in certain zip codes, wears certain labels, comes from certain schools. They raised me inside that system and spent years communicating, in direct and indirect ways, that I did not measure up to it. What I did was not prove them wrong on their terms. I did not go out and find a wealthy husband or a prestigious job title to wave at them. I built something on my own terms, in my own way, and I let that speak. And the exquisite quiet irony of it all is that the world they care so deeply about impressing, the Constance Aldridges and the Barrett O'Seas, the Ashford Club crowd, that world responded to me first. They were asking where I was before I even walked through the door. I think about my mother's text sometimes, late at night when I am working. Do not bother coming. Only elites are invited. And I think, she was not wrong that the party was for elites. She was just wrong about who I was. I was already one. I just had not bothered to tell her yet. So, what are your thoughts on her actions? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more.